So, funny thing, as I'm making this video, Blizzard released a new experimental card to address many of the concerns that I detail here. But since we don't know if they all will go to live, and as well just context of why they're going to be doing those changes, I'm going to keep this video as it is and just double upload. We'll cover the experimental changes in another video. Let this stand as part 1, and then we'll recap what they were attempting to do with the next video covering the changes. What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for Your Overwatch. Today we're going to be discussing the meta trends, what the heck's going on with the game. What have Blizzard done this time? Well, it's a little bit complicated. I wanted to make a tier list video, but because the rule sets of how things are interacting are so complicated right now, I'm not too comfortable doing so because of how widely things are going to distort based on your skill, the skill of your teammates, and the game sense of everyone involved. And also as well, Blizzard has made some decisions that have made some players very angry, especially the high-level community, so I suspect some of this will be changing maybe as early as next week. So I don't want to give advice that lasts 2 days and then everything's changed again. But barring massive changes, some of these general trends will still be in effect. And one of them, the first primary one that we have to discuss, I think was happening before this most recent patch anyway, and that is the difficulty of playing main tanks in this new environment. Now, high-level players will tell you that they're actually useless, which may surprise many of you, especially those of you that voted in my recent polls on Twitter and YouTube, saying that tank was the most strong solo queue character. These kinds of results are incredibly interesting to me. I want to go further in depth in what I think about this question in a separate video, due to how misguided these results actually are, and how revealing they are to some of the core mistakes I see players make in their mentality and how they're supposed to play the game. But for the purpose of this video, let's get back to the point. Tanks are strong, but not main tanks. The reason being, when the power level of the game went down, my assumption was going to be that main tanks would feel stronger because, well, there's just less damage, so that means you can just go take space, right? The thing that I was so wrong about, and why the opposite of what I thought occurred, because your teammates and the enemies have a less severe ranged battle. It's still severe with Widowmaker, but generally a lot of the poke damage has gone down. Because of that, the off angles that your teammates can create are less punishing than before. So because of that, a higher percentage of focus fire goes on to the tanks. So it was hard for me to imagine that this result would happen, but because of the power level of damage going down, the percentage share of focus fire goes up onto main tanks. Other trends as well, obviously the shields have been getting nerfed repeatedly, healing numbers have gone down, so all things considered, the main tank playstyle is just harder to do with random players. However, I'm a little bit skeptical to how weak this actually is, because the problems that I see is that the Overwatch community's ability to play Overwatch has been degraded to such a degree. I mean no offense, but players' understanding of what they should be doing when in a balanced, like actual Overwatchy state of play, when the game's relatively well balanced, is much lower than I expected it to be. And I don't think it's your guys' fault necessarily. Blizzard broke the game for years, where the game was more about abusing mechanics rather than all of the core Overwatch skill sets that we come to respect in terms of like pathing, target selection, map control, ult combinations, ult fight, all that Overwatch game sense stuff kind of got pushed to the side when you had abilities that were shortcuts to win without learning those things. So now that we took those power creep elements away, it's not like the Overwatch community all of a sudden understands these principles. You can't expect them to, right? But don't worry, hopefully I'll have your back with many, many more guides to help us out in this tail end of Overwatch's life, as well as into Overwatch 2. But my point is, I think if players were better at teamwork, playing with main tanks would feel more effective. But because of the lack of understanding of what needs to happen with a main tank getting space, it gets less value than playing without one right now. Let me give you an example, and the gameplay in the background hopefully will help illustrate some of the struggles that I'm talking about. Since range damage is lower, then the viability of a lot of close range characters is higher. Main tanks especially want to play in close range. That's the only spot they're effective, and there is simply just more disables, burst fire, close range tank busting type kit in the game that makes it very easy to punish a tank who aggresses. It's like, okay, we got Ashe and Widowmaker nerfed so that It's not so easy to die instantly at range. I mean, they're still strong characters, but okay, let's put them down a little bit. Remember Reaper? Remember Doomfist? Remember Junkrat, Mei, Symmetra? It seems like every DPS in the game basically looks towards a tank and kills them easily. Unless you play the tanks that have rose in prominence in ranked. Sigma, Wrecking Ball, Roadhog, a little bit of Zarya. Now, I think this assumption that you have to go to these is a little bit overblown. I mean, it is easier without coordination, but I still think that even up against all of those things, if you know the right double bubble play, you can punish that playstyle quite severely. But the problem is the value of playing main tanks right now comes at empowering carry positions that if they don't carry, you are a useless pick. So what I mean is, say the enemy has Roadhog Sigma, which is sort of the most flexible solo queue tank line right now. If you play a coordinated Winston, Zarya, and Ana, you can use the first Zarya bubble to close the distance, gain charge for Zarya as she pushes in, the second bubble to block some cooldowns and make some space, and in the meantime of that happening, even though Hog's got great shotgun damage and Whole Hog to punish Winston, and Sigma's got a ton of damage, if Ana comes in and hits an anti-nade or a sleep on either of these tanks while the enemy has low shielding, then you really overwhelm them, right? But it kind of requires that understanding of what the point of going aggressive with a main tank is. You could do the same thing with Reinhardt as well. I think Winston's a bit stronger at the moment due to his flexibility and primal, but you see my point. Like, you really need your supports to be able to play aggressively to carry. And from what I've noticed anyway, and especially based on the poll results from you guys saying which role is the strongest, players think supports are the weakest. And I suppose I'll bury the lead for that next video where I'll break this down in detail, but the truth is they've never been the weakest. In fact, they are simply a DPS times 2. That's how good every support in the game is. But because supports don't play like they're that level of strength, and they play scared to survive all the time rather than go use the most powerful abilities in the game, then a main tank is just useless. What you need from the tank position isn't to set up that insane power because they're not using it anyway, right? What you need to do is just run at the enemy and insta-kill everything yourself, because support players in our community generally outside of GM, I mean, you can watch Dante do this, you can watch ML7 do this, high-level players do this, but outside of GM, basically, supports play to survive and hide, not to carry the game, which they most definitely can and probably and should be doing, especially when you account for how low all shielding is in the game and the reduced threat of range damage. A character like Ana especially is more powerful than Widowmaker in this environment. There are massive plays for you to make everywhere. In the same way that Widow kind of just roams free and can carry the entire game, well, with her being weaker and easier to counter, I think Ana's a better character now, at least for overall ranked, right? Like maybe at GM, Widows still headshot everything, but under that, enemy Widows aren't as good, which means just landing your abilities as Ana carries the team fight fully, but you have to go to set them up. Okay, those are all the trends that were happening anyway, regardless of the most recent patch. I did, of course, just make my massive hour-long Reinhardt Game Sense Mastery Guide, which I think will help you succeed even under these conditions, but especially as Blizzard maybe fixes some of the balance trends in order to help these characters out. I have asked the question, for example, in the Overwatch Creators Discord, and I think this may be more or less universally agreed upon, that does the player base hate shields and interacting with them, or do we hate when a poke tank can also have a shield, right? Being able to do two things at once. Something that I've brought up is that Winston's bubble is like the strongest it's ever been, but it's not like anybody is complaining about the power level of that shield, because there's so many things that walk into his bubble to punish him that it doesn't feel oppressive. It's not the same thing as Sigma with a shield out and you try to get past it and then he can just combo you and insta-kill you, right? Winston just can't do that. And he has to actually tank, go in, cleave, get out, survive to build up to primal. Then when he does lure you in and pop primal right before he dies, it feels like an earned bit of sustain. Whereas some of the other elements that we're going to go into discussing that Blizzard's trying to buff into relevance don't feel earned in the same way, because they just have inherent cooldowns or can play around like a Batiste lamp, for example, where they get all that firepower that they have, but get this added bit of tanking from another character that is really easy to use and hard for the enemy to counter. So long story short, my question is, if they reverted some of the Rhine nerfs or buffed Winston's bubble even more, would that just allow these tanks to like play the game a bit more? Because they still have a lot of downtime anyway. All the other tanks basically can play in a much more free-flowing poke style. Rhine and Winston have to play their positions, and now under the current meta circumstances, perfectly in order to not mess up. Even if they had a bit more shield, that risk-reward factor would still be in place. If Rhine had 2,000 shield tomorrow, he'd still suffer from all the same problems. He just would be able to extend just a little bit farther, have just slightly more uptime. It wouldn't all of a sudden mean he can shoot and shield at the same time like these other tanks can. Okay, now finally, this patch, the one that basically every pro player, streamer, GM that I can find is very unhappy with. Doing a combination of things, buffing Batiste, buffing Brig, alongside with the other main tank problems we were having, is making it so that double shield is on its way back. I, of course, try to warn against this. I won't go too far into depth because I've already explained why all these things are bad ideas, but the cornerstone of my argument with that is that you shouldn't give stats to characters to force them to work in situations and maps that they shouldn't, and instead focus on making maps that help them succeed in that playstyle. So it doesn't make any sense to me that you buff the bunker comp before you rework the bunker maps, HLC and Paris. Especially looking into Overwatch 2, when you have the chance to have map vetoes or any type of map curation. The devs have already said that something like that is going to be coming. If we have these maps that maybe are a little bit less popular, but are options if you one-trick sim or something, and you can bias playing them more so that you can get your star hero on their star map without needing stats in order to make them viable on everything, then we can have the best of all worlds. But this approach to buff characters into all the maps is just a big mistake, and we've said it time and time again. But I wonder what the casual player base feels about the Brig buffs, because at the GM level, Brig is insane with this extra 25 HP. So much so that players are saying, play Brig or we lose. And I get the impression that, partially due to the support misplays that we spoke about earlier, that supports may feel Brig is still weak, right? So how is this even the case? And also, again, hate to repeat myself, but this is why you can't just give stats to something and hope that it works for the intended player base that you want it to. I'll tell you the reason why. Anytime I see an average support player, and I mean like diamond and below especially, sometimes even masters, go up against a flanker, their immediate response is to have a low APM mistake, which is to say they tunnel vision on the thing fighting them, rather than stepping into the play and going and getting value with the team, or, you know, playing around them so that they're safe. So often do I see a Zenyatta split off to fight towards the Tracer, trying to duel her rather than walking to a health pack or to his team, zoning the Tracer out, playing for angles and map control to make it so that the Tracer can't do anything. At GM, flankers and DPS get outplayed by supports all the time, which is what makes this poll where players think supports are weak really revealing. I think the gap in support play at GM and every other rank is the biggest of any role, because I feel like there's an exponential curve where as you go up the ranks as support, you get way better. Whereas like DPS is pretty linear, tank is pretty linear, support like triples in power level as you go up and up and up. So much so that at GM, supports are always a threat to DPS. Masters sometimes, but below that, supports feel like free kills, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think it's the players' ability, but also their approach to how to play. The reason why I bring all that up is because if you apply that incorrect map control game sense mistake to Zen and Ana, it's very likely that that same player at that same rank is going to apply that to Brig, even if she's good, bad, in between. Right? The old version of Brig with 200 health couldn't run at the Tracer and succeed. A couple versions ago with 250 HP and tons of shield maybe could. This is why so many players, Samito, myself, everybody gets so up in arms when the devs try to imbue stats into characters so they succeed at what is a bad play. I'm going to try to do my part over the next coming weeks leading up to Overwatch 2 to make more and more guides to empower the player base with the knowledge of what they should do in these very difficult Overwatch situations, so they don't go to the forums immediately and demand that we have a character that just auto beats flankers so they don't have to learn the game. Instead, if you apply the right playstyle with Brig, you can see what was being done in the recent Contenders Grand Finals tournament, where Brig at 200 HP was getting played in dive mirrors. And you can kind of see this with my own Brig gameplay. I mean, they played her on the same exact map control center, where you need to play for map control, contain, target priority, setting up angles, using cover, not overextending yourself. All of this Overwatch game sense that realistically makes Brig like an unbalanceable character in the route Blizzard is going. Because the problem I have is that if you have all of these game sense tools, you likely won't be on a low rank on any character, basically. And then on the other end, for the higher ranked players, when they have all of those tools, Brig seems like an easy character to do the same things they were already doing. But if you make the wrong mistakes, then you feel like you need all these extra tank stats on Brig to do anything. It's an impossible thing for Blizzard to balance in when it's really the community that needs buffs, not the character. So that's the Brig problem. On the other end of things, with Baptiste seeing more value, there's opportunities to use Baptiste Lamp, which is like the most powerful tanking tool in the game. Think about that. Barriers are so weak because you have to play around cover as a tank anyway perfectly. You might as well have your tank deal damage and play around a lamp because it's going to add more sustain to the team than a tank can. And this just kind of shows you the gap in what I'm saying with how I think the power imbalances is, and sort of the misunderstanding of the community on where the power in the game actually is. Support is like 3 times better than tank right now, in my opinion. It is so easy to have a massive impact on the game, or at least control, have the plays be in your hand, whereas tank, it's incredibly difficult to achieve much of anything most of the time. You take all the aggro, you take all the ults, a big percentage of the time you're just stuck in positioning, needing your team to do something, and that's so bad that you might as well just play a more solo queue friendly tank. And I don't even think they're very strong, but they're better than just catching L's by everything that the enemy can pound into you. And to take this one step further, I would say it's growing increasingly a mistake for Blizzard to quickly balance based on the performance of ranked. Because here's the fundamental flaw of doing that. Ranked players are trying to play either what's popular to them, what they like, regardless of balance altogether. That's a much bigger influencer than we'd like to admit. But then after that, they try to pick what is the easiest route to value. Not what could be the most powerful, right? Like I'm saying, I think double bubble is playable if you're on as aggressive, but not all that stuff that you could work together with a friend and eventually develop and get better at. Us as a community of randoms playing with each other in solo queue, we're not gonna be able to improve that for the next map, right? We need to do the thing that's going to win this map now, or we're losing SR. Everything's in a very short-term mentality. So in that regard, I feel if, for example, we played in a format where on the old patch, you could play a multiple map series, I think you and a team very easily could have played Sigma, Orisa, Baptiste on certain maps on the high ground where they were supposed to play. But it would require a little bit of planning, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of effort from that team to get that to work. But because that comp turned into something that took a bit more effort to do, you will just not really see it in ranked. All the numbers plummet. And even when it is attempted, it's attempted poorly, so it's not going to perform well. We would have needed to gain some experience doing it and learning how it works. This very rapid balancing from Blizzard just flip-flops which one of these comps is easier to run. Now it's the other way, where a lot of players are never playing main tanks, and the old comps that were dominating the game, like Winston, Reinhardt, all that fluid gameplay, that meta that myself and Seagull and everybody was claiming was the best state Overwatch was ever in order to leave that, Blizzard reintroduced through stats bonuses these other characters that, again, like Brig, was seeing competitive play at the pre-made contenders level, but felt too difficult to play around for ranked, so now gifts them stats. So like, okay, here, get in there, champ. Go chase that tracer incorrectly with your extra stats. Go make the bad play and win anyway. Like that's just, this is no way to balance, okay? And it's so wrong that's where I'm just gonna sort of cut this off here. I've gone at greater lengths to communicate this directly to Jeff Kaplan in the creators Discord. A lot of creators seem to be agreeing with the points I'm making, or we're all kind of making the same noises around this. I know sometimes high level players are very biased towards their point of view, but I truly think that this dichotomy of how the different tiers approach the game just has to be dealt with by Blizzard, not through harsh balancing, but instead through map design, map vetoes, formats, hero restrictions on higher level players, ways so that the win at all costs type players who are just trying to gain SR and game the system as best they can have tools to shape their gameplay so that they don't feel forced to like now play Brig forever if they don't want to lose, but also at the same time that the game can feel approachable for lower ranked players. But to some degree, you got to give them time to learn how to play. You can't wait 2 weeks, have Overwatch be back in its glory days again, realize that, oh, well, players don't know what to do. Let's just buff it so they succeed. You know, that's silly, right? The way I think of it is like this. Let's say I, as a younger brother, played against an older brother in checkers, and I got my butt kicked. I don't run to mom and say, can you turn my pieces into chess pieces so that they're all much stronger and I easily beat him? That's just nonsense, right? In some ways, I feel like this is how Blizzard is balancing the game. The more we go down the road of incentivizing these unearned deployables that just allow you to maintain positioning and don't have to think about getting map control or fighting for it, the worse the game plays. The reason why everyone loved the old patch was because all the fluidity of the game came back. And I want you guys to remember, I love playing so many of these characters that are very problematic to the Overwatch gameplay. I just think that they should be incentivized to be played per maps, per, you know, hero bans, per whatever. Get them in rotation that way, not just give them extra stats so they work all the time. That's not what we should be aiming for. I love Sigma Orisa, the APM of BAP, the tank gameplay of Brig. I mean, it's like playing a tank that's actually good. I love playing Brig. But when you start to stack all these things together, then it makes this Frankenstein monster of a team comp that just robs all of the game sense from the game and just wins by rock, paper, scissors. That's what we wanted gone. So hopefully, with any luck, we'll see a new experimental card next week. We don't have to worry about the skies falling. One step backwards is fine. We've seen the results. I think I've done a good job trying to explain the pros and cons and how it affects different ranks and the problems in play. All we can do is take a deep breath and be patient and allow the process to work its way out. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and be sure to hit the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for Your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time.